In this episode, we move into a part of system change that often looks organized from the outside, but can become messy very quickly if the basics are not controlled well. When a new system, enhancement, or fix is almost ready to be delivered, the organization has to know exactly what is being changed, how it is configured, when it will be released, and what could happen if something goes wrong. That is where implementation, configuration, and release management come together in a very practical way. For someone preparing for the Certified Information Systems Auditor (CISA) certification, this topic matters because many business disruptions are not caused by bad intentions or dramatic attacks, but by ordinary changes that were poorly organized, poorly tracked, or poorly introduced into the live environment. A system can be technically sound and still fail at implementation if the wrong version is released, a setting is inconsistent, or supporting teams are not prepared. The deeper lesson is that reliable technology depends not only on building something useful, but on moving it into operation in a controlled and repeatable way. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Implementation configuration is really about knowing the exact state of the system that is being delivered and making sure that state matches what the organization approved. A configuration includes settings, options, connections, versions, access rules, and other choices that shape how the system behaves in practice. Many beginners think of configuration as something narrow and technical, like a hidden screen full of settings, but the concept is broader than that. It includes the choices that determine how the system interacts with users, data, other applications, infrastructure, and business processes. If those choices are undocumented, inconsistent, or changed without control, the organization can lose confidence in what the system actually is. That confusion creates risk because support teams may not know what was deployed, managers may assume controls are active when they are not, and auditors may not be able to trace how a live environment reached its current state. Good configuration management creates clarity, and clarity is one of the foundations of trustworthy operations. A helpful way to think about configuration is to imagine a commercial kitchen that follows a strict recipe, equipment setup, staffing pattern, and sanitation process every day. If one cook changes the oven temperature, another substitutes an ingredient, and a third rearranges the storage plan without coordination, the kitchen may still produce food, but quality and safety become unpredictable. Technology environments work in a similar way. Two systems may have the same name and look almost identical on the screen, yet one may contain a different setting, an unapproved change, or a missing control that completely alters how it behaves. That is why organizations establish configuration baselines, which are approved reference points for how a system should be set up at a given time. A baseline gives teams something stable to compare against, making it easier to notice drift, detect unauthorized changes, and understand whether an implementation matches the intended design. Without that shared reference point, even experienced teams can end up debating basic facts instead of solving the actual problem. Release management is the discipline of planning, coordinating, approving, and delivering changes into live use in a way that reduces disruption and supports business objectives. If configuration management answers what the system should look like, release management helps answer when it should move, how it should move, who needs to be involved, and what conditions must be satisfied before and after it happens. A release may involve a brand new system, a feature enhancement, a security fix, a performance improvement, or a correction to a known defect. The important point is that a release is not just a technical handoff from builders to operators. It is a controlled business event because the change affects real users, real transactions, and real operational risk. Beginners sometimes assume a release is simply the moment software becomes available, but sound release management recognizes many connected activities around that moment, including approval, communication, preparation, monitoring, fallback planning, and post-release support. The release itself may be brief, but the control surrounding it is what makes the event dependable. These two ideas are closely connected because a release without controlled configuration can deliver the wrong thing, and controlled configuration without release discipline can still create operational confusion. The organization needs confidence that the right version, with the right settings, reaches the right environment at the right time. That sounds obvious, yet many failed implementations come down to surprisingly basic mistakes, such as deploying a test version instead of the approved one, forgetting a dependent component, leaving default settings in place, or introducing a change during a high-risk business period. When CISA focuses on this area, the concern is not merely whether a release occurred, but whether it occurred in a way that preserved integrity, accountability, and business stability. That includes knowing who approved the configuration, who executed the release, whether duties were separated appropriately, and whether evidence exists to show that the live environment reflects what management intended. When those details are vague, risk rises even if the change initially appears successful, because the organization loses control over cause, effect, and responsibility. One of the most important concepts for beginners is the idea that environments should be distinct and controlled. Organizations usually work with separate spaces for building, testing, and running live services so that incomplete or risky changes do not reach normal operations too early. Even if a learner never touches these environments directly, it helps to understand why they exist. A change may behave well in a lower environment, but fail in production because of different settings, data conditions, access rules, or workload patterns. That is why release management depends heavily on environmental consistency and careful promotion from one stage to the next. If teams manually rebuild settings from memory or make undocumented adjustments along the way, they increase the chance that the final environment will not match what was actually tested. A controlled implementation process tries to reduce these surprises by defining how configurations are established, reviewed, compared, and moved. The main goal is not to eliminate all difference, because some differences are necessary, but to prevent uncontrolled difference from becoming a hidden source of failure. Version control is another foundational idea, even at a beginner level, because organizations need to know which edition of a system or component is under review, under test, approved, or live. Without version discipline, teams can speak confidently about a release while actually referring to different code sets, documents, or configuration states. That kind of confusion creates delays at best and serious production incidents at worst. Release management relies on clear version identification so that approvals, testing results, implementation records, and support actions all point to the same thing. From an audit perspective, this is important because evidence loses value when it cannot be tied to a specific approved release. Imagine a project team saying the latest tested build was released, but the operations team actually deployed a slightly newer variation containing last-minute changes. Even if the difference looks small, the organization can no longer honestly claim that the live result matches the tested result. Strong control in this area is really a way of protecting truth, because it prevents people from making assumptions that are no longer supported by evidence. Another major part of release management is change approval, which means the organization formally reviews a proposed release before it enters production. Approval should not be treated as a rubber stamp or a rushed final signature gathered to satisfy policy. It is meant to confirm that the change is understood, tested appropriately, aligned with business priorities, and acceptable from a risk perspective. Different organizations use different approval structures, but the basic purpose remains the same. Important releases should not depend entirely on the enthusiasm of the project team. People outside the development effort may need to review business timing, operational readiness, dependency impacts, compliance concerns, or support implications before the release moves forward. For a beginner, it helps to think of approval as a disciplined checkpoint where the organization asks whether it is truly ready, not whether it is simply tired of waiting. CISA often emphasizes that governance matters most when pressure is high, because that is exactly when teams are most tempted to bypass formal review and rely on confidence instead of evidence. Timing matters more than many people expect, because even a sound release can cause disruption if it is introduced at the wrong business moment. Releasing a major change during peak transaction periods, financial closing, a major sales event, or a staff shortage can increase the likelihood that minor issues turn into serious incidents. Release management, therefore, includes planning for windows of activity, support availability, communication needs, and business tolerance for interruption. Some changes can happen during normal hours because they are low risk and easy to reverse, while others should be scheduled for quieter periods with extra monitoring and specialist support ready. A beginner should recognize that release timing is not simply about choosing a convenient date on a calendar. It is about aligning technical work with business reality so that risk stays within acceptable limits. Good timing also supports better decision-making, because people are more likely to notice and respond to issues when the release occurs under conditions that were intentionally prepared rather than improvised at the last minute. Poorly timed change is one of the easiest ways to turn an ordinary update into an unnecessary crisis. Communication plays a central role because a release affects more people than the team making the change. Users may need to know what is changing, when it will happen, what to expect afterward, and where to go for help if something feels wrong. Operations teams, service desk staff, business managers, vendors, and security personnel may all need release details tailored to their responsibilities. Weak communication creates confusion that often looks like system failure even when the underlying change is working reasonably well. For example, users may assume a process is broken if its appearance or sequence changes without warning, or support teams may escalate routine post-release behavior because they were never briefed on the expected result. Good release communication is not marketing language or vague reassurance. It is practical, timely, and specific enough to help different groups prepare for their role. In an audit context, communication matters because coordinated implementation depends on shared awareness, and shared awareness does not happen automatically. It has to be planned as part of the release, not added afterward when people begin asking what just happened. A strong release process also includes contingency thinking, which means the organization plans for the possibility that the implementation may not go as intended. Beginners sometimes hear about rollback or fallback planning and assume it represents pessimism, but it is actually a sign of maturity. A team that prepares recovery options is not expecting failure. It is respecting the reality that change introduces uncertainty. If a release causes severe performance issues, data problems, or control failures, the organization should already know whether it can restore the previous version, activate an alternate process, or otherwise reduce business harm quickly. The best contingency plans are realistic, tested where appropriate, and understood by the people who might need to execute them under pressure. This matters in CISA because control is not proven only by success. It is also shown by how well the organization can respond when the change does not behave as expected. A release with no practical recovery path may look efficient until the first serious issue appears, and then the absence of preparation becomes painfully visible. Configuration drift is another risk worth understanding because it often develops quietly over time. Drift happens when the live environment slowly moves away from the approved and known configuration because of undocumented changes, emergency fixes, convenience adjustments, or inconsistent administrative practices. At first, the system may still function, and that can make the issue easy to ignore. Over time, though, drift makes troubleshooting harder, testing less reliable, security weaker, and future releases more dangerous because teams are no longer working against a stable and understood baseline. A new release may fail not because the release itself was poor, but because the environment had already become unpredictable. This is one reason organizations compare configurations, document exceptions, and review changes even after a release is complete. From an audit standpoint, drift is important because it erodes assurance. Management may believe it is operating a controlled environment, yet the actual state of the system may differ in ways that no one fully recognizes until a failure or review exposes the gap. Segregation of duties also matters in release management because concentrated control can create both error risk and abuse risk. If the same individual can design a change, approve it, configure it, release it, and validate it without independent review, the organization loses important checks and balances. Even honest and capable people make mistakes, especially when deadlines are tight and familiarity creates overconfidence. Separating responsibilities helps ensure that changes are reviewed from more than one angle and that no single person has unchecked power over a critical implementation. This does not mean every organization needs a huge staff or a complex process for every small update. It means the level of review and separation should be appropriate to the risk, significance, and sensitivity of the release. For CISA learners, the broader lesson is that release management is partly about process design, not just technical movement. Controls around who can do what and under what approval are just as important as the files and settings being deployed. A system can fail through poor governance even when the technology itself was built correctly. Documentation may not sound exciting, but it is one of the most practical controls in this entire area because it turns memory into evidence. Release records, configuration baselines, approval trails, test results, implementation checklists, exception notes, and support instructions all help the organization understand what happened and why. When documentation is weak, teams may still complete a release, but they lose the ability to reconstruct decisions, learn from mistakes, or prove that controls operated properly. That weakness becomes especially serious when a problem emerges weeks later and no one can clearly identify which configuration was changed, who approved the exception, or what condition existed before the issue started. Good documentation does not need to be bloated or theatrical. It needs to be accurate enough to support accountability, support operations, and preserve the organization's understanding over time. Auditors value documentation not because paper itself creates control, but because documented evidence helps distinguish disciplined management from informal guesswork. In a well-run environment, the record of the release is strong enough that someone new to the situation can understand the main facts without relying on rumor or memory. From the auditor's point of view, implementation configuration and release management are examined through the lens of risk, evidence, and business impact. The question is not whether every release was perfect, because perfection is not realistic in complex environments. The question is whether the organization has reasonable controls to ensure that approved changes are configured properly, released in a disciplined manner, monitored effectively, and corrected responsibly when problems occur. An auditor may review release calendars, change approvals, segregation of duties, testing evidence, configuration records, access restrictions, incident trends, and post-release issues to understand whether the process is actually working. If repeated incidents trace back to rushed approvals, weak documentation, uncontrolled production access, or environment mismatch, that suggests deeper control weaknesses rather than isolated mistakes. For a learner, this is an important mindset shift. The goal is not to admire the release process because it sounds organized. The goal is to ask whether the process consistently protects business operations, data integrity, and accountability when real pressure and real complexity are present. By the time we reach the end of this discussion, the main idea should feel clear. Implementation configuration and release management are really about making change safe enough to trust. A business depends on systems behaving in known ways, and that confidence is built by controlling versions, maintaining accurate configurations, approving changes carefully, communicating well, preparing contingencies, and preserving evidence of what was done. When those disciplines are strong, releases become more predictable, support teams become more effective, and the organization can adapt without losing control of its environment. When those disciplines are weak, the same change that looked routine can trigger outages, confusion, security exposure, and long arguments about what actually happened. For CISA preparation, remember that this topic is not just about moving technology from one place to another. It is about ensuring that implementation happens in a way that is governed, traceable, and aligned with business needs, because that is what turns technical change into controlled operational reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.